Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Data Tech Talk. Today we have a very special guest with us. Her name is Ngozi Anajuba and she has like years and years of experience in the data migration space and the data management space as well. And I just want to welcome you, Ngozi. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Thank you for having me on, Shama. It's a
It's
pleasure
such
to
an
be
honor.
here. Yeah.
Thank you. It's such an honor for you, for me actually, to have you on the show. I know that you have so much experience in data migration space. You were actually consulting with the in NHS for many years as well. You were a data migration consultant, and then finally, more recently, you actually moved on to a kind of like a role where you are doing data analysis and architecture consulting as well with Capgemini for mainly for probably public sector data migration programs, if I understand that correctly. So could you tell us a little bit more? I know I did that on a high level, so could you tell us a little bit more about your journey in the data migration, data management space?
Right. Okay. So I came into the data management space from originally being a clinician. So I trained as a dietitian, finished my program, started working, and I had the mind to go into medical school, actually. But at the time I was processing my admission into medical school to go and read medicine, I also stumbled on a course in computing and information management. And I was just intrigued about it. Before then, during my final year in training, I had done some reasonable work, doing data analysis on my project. So when I saw this program and they were asking for people who were not computer science graduates to come in and do the program, I was like, okay, I'm going to go for it. It sounded odd. I mean, you're in the same school trying to process a medical school admission, and also now pursuing an advanced degree in information science and data management. But I told myself that the way computers were going and infringing on every aspect of life, I felt that was the space to be. So I processed, put in my application, wrote a personal statement as you would do to go into postgraduate studies. And then I was invited for that program. And let me tell you, Shama, it wasn't even funny because most of my classmates were computer science graduates. And here
Oh,
I had no clue what they were talking about. I was just like, what am I doing with these guys? And when you don't know something, everybody sounds super smart, right? And there was, and I kept telling myself, I can't fail because failing is not just the 2 years invested in that program. It is 2 years that I would have been on my medical school career. It would have been 2 years I would have established myself as a dietitian. It would have been 2 years of wasted resources. And when you're, a lot younger, 2 years sounds like a lot. And, but I went through with it and I persevered. And I did many strange things, including getting asked to be locked inside the computer lab overnight because I told myself I had to learn some programming language we're learning and I had to practice a lot and I just didn't have the access to computing that I needed. I felt I needed to do it. And I felt the best thing was just to stay overnight in the computer lab and be locked open. They would open the door in the morning when they came into the building. I myself, I and another colleague did that consistently for months. I didn't know anybody noticed until the day we graduated and the director was talking about us. He was just giving a speech and talking about determination and all of that and tenacity. And that was my first thing into computing. So off the back of that program, we had an opportunity to do a placement with different organizations as you would do with some of these degrees. And I got placed in a private sector organization. And one of the things I then did was I looked at the problems, issues they were having in the business and things that I felt could benefit from computerization. And I picked one of them. I told the manager, I said, I'm here for 6 weeks. It shouldn't be enough to do this project. So I did a business case. I said it shouldn't be enough to do the project, but if you allow me to use it as my dissertation for my postgraduate studies, I will finish this, I'll build the software for you and I'll give it to you free. So they said, go for it. But you know what such things do? It's like hands-on learning. I learned how to do things that my curriculum didn't particularly require. And that earned me my first job with them.
So
Because when I dropped it,
is
yeah,
that
they now said,
your
oh,
original journey to data management space? Like that's the first job you got was
yeah. Yeah, because when I dropped it for them, they said, you know what, you are the best person to, implement this program.
sorry, you
So
went from biology related components to more like
I,
programming and
yeah,
migration.
remember I have a clinical background, so I thought about the NHS and health, and that's how I started looking for, ways to get into the NHS. Now, the funny thing is that to get into the NHS wasn't as simple as get a job, because
Right.
it was during the the economic crisis, when things were happening all over the world, 2008. And here I was, I'd just come off maternity leave, and I didn't want to go back to my job, and I was looking for a place. So nobody was employing, no, there was a freeze everywhere. So I approached someone I knew that worked somewhere, and we talked about what I could do, and what my skill set were. And he said, oh, it would really be good to have you in place in our organization, but we are not employing. So I made them an offer. I felt they couldn't refuse. I told them, I said, you know what, I'll come in and work for 1 month free. Don't pay me. If at the end of 1 month you think I'm not adding value, we'll say bye-bye, no worries. But if at the end of 1 month you think I'm adding value and you can pay me, then we'll talk about it. And that's what we did. So I went in there, we called it a voluntary position, and and I went to work for them. And again, I started by systemizing some of their processes, putting in processes in place for what they do. Remember, I hadn't touched anything NHS data before then. So it took me in that 1 month a lot of learning. But by the end of 1 month, I had known enough about the NHS data sets, again, doing a lot of nice sorting to, to become sort of an SME in a particular data set, which is their foremost data set in mental health. And at the end of that month, they offered me a contract. And that's how I started. So from that 1 month placement, that specific organization, I spent 1 year with them. And then I now ended up about 10 years within the NHS. And then about 2 years ago, I thought, oh, you know what, I've done a lot of things in the NHS, including migration for about 5 trusts, leading the migration for about 5 trusts. And I thought, where else can I go? And, you know, the process I implement for migration, is this something that works well in places, in certain places and don't work in others? So I decided to look at another sector to see if I have actually got something that can be implemented regardless of what sector it is. And it's proving to be the case. So
Yeah.
that's why I'm here now.
Thank you, Ngozi. That was really lovely explanation of all your professional backgrounds and how you got into it, and how you progressed through your career. So that's really an inspiration for us as well. Um, so we just wanted to kind of understand from you, when you are doing a data migration program, in terms of the people and the processes, the data analysis itself, how do you set it up? Maybe if you can tell it to us in a brief way, so that we can understand that, okay, these are the core components of data migration programs.
Right. So it's good you talked about the people and the process, because those are two core things. We are not talking technology at this time. It's just people and process. And that's what I try to systemize. And I'm not so much first about what technology we are going to use. I start with the people and the process. And in the people and the process, one of the core things you have to understand is, what type of migration are we talking about? Because when people say data migration, they may mean so many things.
Yeah.
And one of the first things I do when I'm approached is to find out, what exactly are you doing? And because the person, talking to you, so we're migrating, but I have, a number of questions I ask, because we can be doing a data center migration. You could be doing an application migration. You could be doing a merger of organizations and migrating data from both organizations into a different system entirely and into a new application entirely. You could be doing a transformation. in which case you're changing processes of the organization and therefore changing the underlying data and where it goes. You can be doing a data warehouse migration. So these are all sorts of different things, and sometimes they all come into play in the same migration project. So I like to know exactly what is it that we're looking at, because whatever it is important for the migration team to have exactly the same understanding. Because if they don't, some people may think, oh, we're doing a transformation, you know, and they go ahead staging whatever work they need to do to back a transformation process. And the data people might think, oh, we're just migrating the data warehouse. So my first thing is, okay, you know what, forget the terminology. Let's go through. So I start asking them things like, so are you going to change your front end application as part of this process? Yes or no? Are you going to change your data warehouse as part of this process? Yes or no? Are you going to be changing the location where you store the data as part of this process, your servers and all of that? Are you going to merge with an organization? Are there units of your organization that were not formally on your application that you're hoping to bring in as part of this process? Is there an acquisition going on? Are you shedding some units? Because all of that will determine exactly how we prepare and plan the migration process. I've not come into the methodology of the migration. I'm just talking about the business, because first thing I do is to understand the business. And I think that's one thing that's helped me be successful in doing the migration across sectors. So I like to understand the business. From understanding the business, I understand what is it that we are called to do, because that determines who comes into the people that manage the migration. So from there, we go into the governance process, because when we're migrating, most of the organizations, I'm an external entity to them, and I come in. So I need to understand the governance process that we need to set up and to run the migration.
All right. So I was also wondering, what are some of the, let's say, the frameworks that are out there that can be used for data migration? Is there a framework, first of all?
There are many. There are many frameworks, and some are tied to specific tools. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about tools because I like to be too agnostic. I like to be technology agnostic. I find that a lot of times clients may have a preference or already have a tool in place or have a tool that's associated with the target system or whatever. So I'm flexible about that. But what I'll talk about is the process or, of the framework itself. So one of the things that, I talked about earlier about understanding what it is the specific project is about, because they are not always the same thing. And I'm now going to talk about what do you then do, having identified what it is. So one of the things I do for organizations is to now put together a strategy for doing that migration, because some of the information I gather from that initial, so there is an initial sort of discovery that goes around the data and the process that we can use. One of the outcomes or the products of that is the strategy. And that strategy, a lot of times there are specific frameworks that that you can port from one system to another, but specific businesses and organizations may, you have to flavor it to suit the situation. And one of the things I find that is core in getting your data migration into a success is building a very robust business rule for your data migration. So if you don't understand the business and you don't understand how you then put together the rules, you won't be able to have a benchmark. You talked about data quality. So one of the things you can do, because nobody has the time or the resources to get their data 100% clean. It's not possible, not feasible. And it's too time consuming. And data is something that you keep churning out every day, right? As people work, they bring out data, and with it is some quality issues. So what you do is to set up some business rules, set up the governance for the whole project, the authority, who signs off what, who do you go to? And that's the governance structure. And then set up the business rules that is approved by the whatever governance I set around it. and then set up your benchmark. So you have to have a benchmark that tells you when we achieve this, we're good to go. If it's not up to this, we cannot move on. It's not something you make up as you go along. You have to set it up as, as part of your framework, and then set up.
You, sorry,
Sorry.
how sorry to interrupt. How would you build up the benchwork a benchmark if you have never done this before? Like as an organization, you've never done, let's say, the migration program before. How would you set up the benchmark? How would you know that these are the quality benchmarks? Below this, it's a problem.
So what would cause your business to not function if you moved data across as is? Where would you get to and is okay? What will cause your target system to break, right? So if you move the data without doing something to it, how would it impact this
Mm-hmm.
system? How would it impact your clients? Or in the health sector, would it cause some, unsavory outcomes for clients, for patients? You don't want to go there. So those are the kind of benchmarks you have to set. And I'll just give you a small example. In some clinical systems in the NHS, the NHS number is a primary key of identification for patients. In some other systems, the hospital ID is the primary key of identification. So in places where the hospital ID is the primary key of identification for patients, and the NHS number is just a secondary key, there's a primary focus on the hospital ID. It cannot be null, it must be correct, and all of that. They may not pay as much attention to the NHS number. So I have seen situations where we're moving from system where the primary key is the hospital ID, we are going to a system where the primary key is the NHS number. Now, if the NHS number is not valid in this one and you move it across, suddenly you can't find me. I'm a patient, but you can't find me because I didn't have an NHS number. If it was duplicate, if my NHS number was reading your name, for instance, then we have all sorts of troubles because you're picking up my record, but you're looking at Shama's information. So you have to build such benchmarks. What are those data elements that we cannot allow nulls in? Because they may not be the same in the two systems, your legacy and your target. And as I said, what are those things that if you don't have them available, is either going to cause the target system to break or cause you to not be able to maybe make your reports or make decisions because the information is presenting in the target system in a different way. Remember, you were already happy and sort of managing your legacy system, but the information may not always translate across same. And there are also entity mismatches. So the terminology used on one system means an entirely different thing on a new system. So there is that element of building your business rules. There's that element of putting your benchmarks, and there's the element of mapping your data. So you use all these three things to sort of now form a framework of these are the things we are going to move across. And also, what's the sequence of events? Because certain things must happen before others. Right. So you sort of pull that together, but you get to that place from knowing the business. And for businesses that don't have any experience in data migration, I would always advise people to get help, get the help of a data migration specialist, because your journey will be a lot smoother. It will be a lot less painful for you. I mean, there is that thing of how do you know how to pick a good data migration specialist. There is that, but I would always advise people get a data migration specialist. If you don't know who, there are ways you can sort of find out who's done what and all, the way you recruit people, specialist people, is, I'll leave it for them to find ways to check who's done what and who can actually do, because I have seen people, you know, start a project, and when I'm called in, I'm thinking, who was working on this? Not to say I know it all, don't get me wrong, but there are certain things I would expect. But and when I talk to, when you look at it, you find that they were just not being advised properly. That's all I'm going to say about it. So those are some of the few things you need to do.
Yeah, I've always wondered because I have worked in a few data migration cases myself when I was working back in Australia with Experian. And one of the things that, always I wanted to understand and find out about is when you do the data migration, quite often you will see organizations doing it in an iterative way, so that, for example, they have multiple iterations of how they transition their data. They build their business rules and data quality rules, and then afterwards, there is a final iteration where you probably have a potential a freeze period for your source system that you are transferring, and then you migrate it over and then do the tests all over again. So is this what I described? Is this the right sort of approach that organizations always take? Have you seen something different?
I mean, it's most times, even if you break it up into modules, it's always best to have your staging where you do repeated processes of, load, check, rinse, repeat, load, check, because you're moving something from, a different, even if it's a database, it's a different schema, the table formats are different. As I said, and then we go into the semantics, they mean different things. And you just need to make sure whatever you're doing, you go check it and you work on it, because some of the data quality issues actually show up when you've moved the data. That's when you actually notice it. And because you have a benchmark, remember I talked about the benchmark. So if you're saying we have 1 million customers, when we are done, we want 1 million customers, but 1 million customers had addresses. When we finish 1 million customers, of them 100,000 do not have addresses. Maybe because this other system has got an enforced integrity check on maybe postcodes or whatever they're checking. So you have to keep going back and forth. And as part of that iterative process, you have your data cleansing going on. You have your business rule revisions. You have your governance process, checking through it. Because I can decide, and I've done it before, to say, you know what, this cohort of patients cannot be migrated because there's no information around them. And I've seen that a lot. And we'll decide, you know what, we are going to just put these people in some buckets and leave them in this bucket and carry on with the migration because of this. And we sign it off. So when we are doing that benchmark, remember, now I've taken off 100,000 patients because they meet certain criteria. So now I'm expecting 900,000 on the other side. So yeah, there will always be that rinse, repeat until you have the assurance that you've got your data in a state that you can actually go live with. The freeze period you talk about is where you ask people, I encourage people to keep using the system, but we are going to stop collecting information you put in this Sunday. So we have that day because that allows us to, again, benchmark the data so that when we move it across, we know exactly what we're moving across. And the process takes a bit of time. So you can't, I'll have to have that lag room where I'm doing the process of loading, even though processes are going on. So that's the freeze period. They'll carry on using the system. We find a way of doing the delta load, what we call the delta load, which is load after the go live, technical go live. Yeah, so we do the data load after the technical go live, which is when only us see the data in the new system. We test it, we assure it, and then we now, put the data load. Sometimes we actually have a business go live before the delta load, depending on the time the actual load takes us, and the volume of data and all of the things we need to do.
Right, right. No, that makes complete sense. And Ngozi, thank you. Last question that I have is around a challenge that you potentially experienced while you were doing a data migration. I know you have experienced or gone through a lot of different programs, but if you do have one or two where you think that was okay, that was worth solving, and it was a challenging experience, if you could share with us, that would be great.
When I'm asked this question, I always think, oh, which one is the best one to pick now? But one that's would always stand out for me is one where, as when I talked about identify exactly what project you're doing. So this one was a case that we were merging two organizations. The target system didn't exist,
Mm.
so we were building a target system. And the organization that owned the target system had never built a system in that space. So I became SME of clinical processes I'm describing all sorts of things, you know, and they had no clue. The people I was speaking with had no clue about these processes. So it was challenging because I didn't just have to think in my head, how do I move data across? I had to be thinking of all the clinical processes. I had to be talking to the clinical leads and walking through the processes to make sure we've got it all in order. And at the same time, build my business rules, do my data integrity. And at the end of it, because they were building a new system, after and the migration engine was theirs, they were building migration engine, the front end, they were building it entirely new. And I now, when we finished the migration, you talked about the iteration. I had over 6,000 data elements of one single data type to manually map.
That's crazy.
We had to sit down and start saying, this is this. It's such, because the system they built throughout those ones, they couldn't map them.
How long did it take you to map those 6,000 elements?
Listen, Shama, the first day they brought that thing, you know, they sent us the information, right? I had an associate who was actually working for this organization that is doing the work. She sat down and started crying.
Oh no.
She just started, she said, how are we going to do this? Because I have this mantra. I tell people, I say, you know, my team always know, I tell them we can eat an elephant, provided we take a bite at a time.
Yeah.
So I told her, I said, don't worry, we'll do it. She sat down and was weeping, not, you know, she was just like, and I had to go into counseling mode, you know, talk her down. It's okay, we'll just take it one day at a time. I had an army of people working on this, but I had to check each one to make sure they were mapped correctly, because we're looking at diagnosis of patients and you don't want to make any mistakes in those things. So it was really, really horrendous. Shama, it was tough, but we did it. I'm very happy we were able to do it, and we were able to migrate patients with their accurate diagnosis. It was really worth the while, but it was tasking. It was very tasking and demanding. So whenever I'm called, I want to know if we are building a new target system, so I know I have the frame of mind, I know the kind of people, how many people, because resourcing, you know, this depends on what it is I'm called to do. So if we have to work on such a framework where the system is new, then I have to bring in SMEs, you know, I have to bring in real subject matter experts, because what then I did was I brought in clinicians from different branches of medicine. They had to come into our data then, you know, to talk us through the processes and check through what we're describing and check through what we've submitted and check through what was coming back to make sure, because even though I said I was a clinician, I am no longer a clinician. So, and even if you're a clinician, you only know your own area, isn't it? So we have to bring in different people at different times to come, you know, make sure we're getting the processes right. Yeah.
Well, that was quite a story, Ngozi. Thank you so much for being on our show.
Thank you for having me, Shama. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure just listening to you and how passionate you are about data migration and, you know, the overall journey you had from a clinician to the data management space. You know, it's just a proof that almost anybody who would want to put the work in can actually go into these spaces as well and succeed. So thank you so much again once for joining us. For those of you who are watching, please do subscribe to our channel. It's Data Tech Talk. It's found on YouTube. I will post the links below. And if you want to get in touch with Ngozi, I will also tag her so that you can communicate with her directly as well. And yeah, so till next time, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.